Jason, appreciate the update. Thanks. Now a big moment in the battle over how much the government should keep tabs on all of us in the name of making things safer for everyone. That fight, which has been going on since John Adams was president, intensified with the Edward Snowden leaks. Since then, we've seen one revelation after another, congressional hearings, blue ribbon panels, and more. Today, we watched President Obama conduct a kind of public seminar on both the drawbacks of the surveillance state, but also what he said is the need for it. Joining us with the true politics of what the president said and the changes he wants to make is Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto. So what was the president's main message today?
You know, Anderson, this was a pretty remarkable speech because he's speaking so openly, so publicly about the most secretive aspects of our most secretive intelligence programs. But his message was, in effect, I hear you. I understand why there are questions about this, and that he has a trust deficit both in the states and overseas. And he said that this really goes to the core of what it means to be America. Here's how he described it today.
When you cut through the noise, what's really at stake is how we remain true to who we are in a world that is remaking itself at dizzying speed.
Now, he did say, though, that there are things he's not going to apologize for, that he really does believe that there's reason to have these programs to keep Americans safer. And overseas, he says that just because America has a greater capability doesn't mean we're going to, in his words, unilaterally disarm when it comes to spying overseas, because everyone does it. He did say, though, he's not going to spy on the leaders of our closest allies anymore.
I mean, his critics say, look, this was PR. How much change to these programs is he actually calling for?
I mean, there are some real substantive changes here today. One is the NSA is going to need judicial review when it searches that massive phone metadata. That's a big change. That's a big step forward. But as far as that massive metadata, it's still going to exist somewhere, and the government's still going to want to search that to try to find patterns to prevent terror attacks. Now, he left open a very big question as to where that data is going to live. He says he doesn't want it to live in government hands, that creates the potential for abuse, but hasn't figured out yet where it's going to be. You know, it could be back in the telephone companies. It could be with a third party. They even raised the possibility of, as they develop new capabilities, maybe they won't need to access that data in the same way. That's a big open question, though. And in the meantime, it's going to continue, and but at least with more safeguards.
Yeah, this has obviously been precipitated by what Edward Snowden did. What did the president say about him today? Any change in the administration's attitude toward him?
No, he said no. He said he still, in effect, considers him a criminal. But it is incredible, Anderson, and we've been talking about this all day. This speech would not have happened today without Edward Snowden. This public debate would not have happened. And arguably, some of these changes would not have happened without Edward Snowden. In that sense, no victory for that, little-known NSA, programmer who burst onto the scene last year.
All right, Jim, appreciate the update. Yeah. Thanks. Let's dig deeper now with Glenn Greenwald. His reporting in Britain's Guardian paper, especially the Edward Snowden leaks, in many ways brought this story front and center. He's the author of the upcoming book, No Place to Hide, Edward Snowden, the NSA and the U.S. Surveillance State. Also, Andy Card, who was present at the creation of some of these surveillance programs as chief of staff in the George W. Bush administration. Glenn, do you believe the president went far enough in what he said today?
No, not remotely. I mean, there were a few proposals that I think are positive steps in the right direction, but the crux of the NSA controversy, which is why should the communications data of hundreds of millions, in fact, billions of people every day be collected and stored and have the potential to be monitored and analyzed, has really been left unanswered by the president by his speech. That is an activity that the NSA will continue even if all of his proposals are implemented.
Mr. Card, what did you make of what the president said today? Because a lot of these surveillance measures were started on your watch during the Bush administration.
Well, I want to see a president have all of the tools that he needs to protect the country. So I think that President Obama actually did a courageous thing today. I'm not sure that I agree with every aspect of his recommendation, and he kind of dodged one particular challenge, is where do you store the data. But I think in basic, he protected the ability for a president to have this tool to make important decisions about protecting America. I do not see it as a potential for abuse if you store the data in the right place and you make sure that people who have access to the data have access only for that reason of protecting the country. I don't want it to be used to spy on American citizens. I do think it's important that the president have the ability to understand the nature of communication within the terrorist networks and have that tool available so that he can prevent an attack.
Glenn, what about that?
Andy Card, of all people, saying that there's really no reason to worry about abuse, given that the administration of which he was a part got caught breaking the law when the New York Times, which they won a Pulitzer Prize for disclosing, reported that his administration was spying on the telephone calls of Americans without the warrants required. And of course, we now have the metadata program, which a federal judge appointed by President Bush said was a profound violation of the Fourth Amendment, and even the president's own handpicked panel said that this metadata program doesn't actually play any sort of role at all in disrupting terrorist plots. It is domestic spying. It is the government collecting a list of all the people with whom we're communicating, how long we communicate, who we call, and anybody who thinks that that isn't spying or an invasion of privacy should just post to the internet every month the list of the people with whom they're communicating. Nobody would do that precisely because it is such an invasion of privacy, and it's time that program stopped.
Andy, I want you to be able to respond.
Your comments are a bit naive because it's not the way reality is really functioning. There was no interest in spying on American citizens. There was an interest in collecting communications, using an algorithm to understand what kind of communication and if there was a way to better protect America.
But Andy, even under, I mean, it was controversial even back under the Bush administration, the surveillance measures I mean, there was this issue of you and then White House counsel Alberto Gonzales were accused by then Attorney General John Ashcroft's #2, the guy who's now director of the FBI, of trying to get the Attorney General to reauthorize certain measures while he was in the hospital. He refused to do so. So even back then, among Republicans, there was concern about the illegality of this program.
This program did not become declassified until December 21st of last year, so December 21st, 2013. I have not spoken about that incident at the hospital. There was no effort to get John Ashcroft to sign something over his objection, and as soon as we learned that he was not the Attorney General, we turned and left. But that's beyond that. I'm going to say the concerns that were raised were all addressed by the president, and there was no effort to have everybody resign at the Justice Department. So this is something that has worked very, very well. We've learned as we've done it. It is controversial. I have more confidence in the government doing the right thing than those who are afraid that it will do the wrong thing.
Glenn, one of the recent rulings in a federal court said, the judge said that the metadata program might have helped prevent the 9/11 attacks if they'd been able to intercept a call from the United States to an al-Qaeda safe house in Yemen. I know there was a New American Foundation report that pushed back on the effectiveness of the whole program, but at least as far as the courts are concerned, I mean, it seems unclear if these programs have helped the United States or not. I mean, you say clearly they haven't, but this judge seemed to think otherwise.
Ponderance of evidence, including from Judge Leon, who again is a right-wing judge appointed by the Bush administration, who said that he kept asking the Justice Department for evidence that these programs stop terrorism and they could provide no evidence. The White House Commission, filled with loyalists of the national security state, including the former deputy director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, said the same thing, that there's no evidence that this program is necessary to stop terrorism. There was one federal judge who accepted the government's claim that it could have helped stop 9/11, but two leading al-Qaeda experts in the last 3 weeks, Anderson, Peter Bergen, who is, I believe, an analyst at CNN, and Lawrence Wright, who wrote the definitive book on al-Qaeda in the New Yorker, said that those claims are absurd, that the 9/11 Commission made clear that the U.S. government had in its possession all of the information it would have needed to know about the 9/11 attack. Of course, President Bush famously got a memo saying bin Laden intends to strike within the United States, but they had so much data about people they were spying on that they couldn't connect the dots and even know what they had. And the solution was to spy on even more people, to gather even more evidence. And instead of focusing on terrorists, to collect data indiscriminately about billions of people every day around the world. And that actually makes it harder to detect terrorist plots than if you're focused on actual terrorists, which is what shows these programs actually don't help stop terrorism, as courts and panels and experts have all said.
Oh, how I wish you could sit in a seat to do the job of protecting the country. The president has a tough job. I want to help the president do his job protecting the country. The legislative branch acts for the future. Judges act by reflecting on the past. The president has to deal with the reality of today. And I watch presidents do that. I have confidence that they can do a good job, and this is a valuable tool for them to be able to protect the country.
Mr. Carter, the president...
The oath that the president takes when they get inaugurated is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, one part of which is the Fourth Amendment that says is that we are supposed to be safe from being searched and seized by the government without probable cause, not having all of our communications data collected, monitored, and analyzed, even though there's no evidence of wrongdoing. That's the responsibility and oath of the president, according to the Constitution.
And that's why I would not like to see this migrate to the domestic side. I don't want it migrating to the domestic side.
Mr. Cord, I got to ask you, though, the president would not have been making comments today had Edward Snowden not revealed what he has so far revealed through Glenn Greenwald and others. Do you believe Snowden is a traitor? Do you believe he should face prison time?
I believe that he is a criminal. I believe that he violated his oath of office. He violated his security clearances, and he should be held accountable for that. And I think that his acts were not good for the country, not good for the United States, not good for our effort to protect the country, and not good for our efforts to bring diplomacy to the point that it can help to mitigate problems that might affect our national security.
Andy Card, I appreciate your time. Glenn Greenwald as well. Thank you. Well,
Thank you.
Let us know what you think. Let's talk about it on Twitter, @AndersonCooper. Tweet me using hashtag AC360. Coming up next.